Hello, welcome to Zoonosis with Joy. My name is Joy. Today we're going to be talking about raw food diets for pets, also known as the BARF diet. Yuck. So, we're going to be talking about what this diet is, how common it is, the ideas behind it, the risks, and some closing thoughts as well. So, first of all, what's this raw food BARF diet that everyone's talking about with their pets? Well, I'm glad you asked. So as the name implies, raw means raw, uncooked foods that we're feeding to our animals. So things like meat, organ meats, or bones. And BARF basically means biologically appropriate raw foods, or bones and raw food diet, basically. So as these are the kind of things that people are feeding their pets nowadays. I'm glad that you know this now. If you don't own a pet, this is something that you probably hear on pet blogs all the time. You probably, if you have an animal that you got from a breeder, breeders are feeding these to these animals and they're recommending owners start it. People are saying it on Facebook, on Twitter, all over the place. You go on Google, they give you recipes. It's just nuts how common this is, basically. So with regards to that, they actually did a study in 2008, and I'm sure it's more now, that 1 in 10 cats and 1 in 4 dogs are being fed at least part of their diet as raw food. Now, this is opposed to things like your, standard kibbles or your standard canned foods or any of those veterinary diets that you may have heard about. These are things that people are either buying online, they're getting it from specialty pet food stores, or they're, just making it at home, just homemade sort of raw food, no risk to that at all, and getting it that way. So why on earth are people doing this? The main reason, of course, is that this is natural. This is what animals would have in nature, and therefore it's better. So this is the kind of thing that people are kind of doing with their animals nowadays because, natural is better, right? So the other thing that propels this is, a handful, small-scale studies, and, granted, I think the evidence is probably there, that raw foods increase stool quality. So if you have an animal that has, diarrhea or has softer stools, owners report that the stool quality is better with some of these raw food diets. And I think there is evidence for that. I think that, that is supported. There's a lot of anecdotal, i.e. just made up BS that isn't supported by any sort of thing. It's just someone said it, and therefore that's what people are saying. Now, first of all, let's kind of talk about what sort of things dogs and cats should be eating, just to kind of get the general nutrition gist out of the way. Obviously, when we think about nutrition, we think about macronutrients and micronutrients. Your macros are going to be things like proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. Cats should be getting very low amounts of carbohydrates. They are hypercarnivores. They need to eat more than 70% of their diet should be meat or proteins. So these are things like liver, things like muscle fiber, things like your kidneys, your offals, those kind of things. And if they are fed high carbohydrate diets, they are more prone to getting things like obesity and diabetes. Dogs are a little bit interesting that way. So dogs have diverged from wolves about 14,000 years ago. Check my other video out for that. And it seems that dogs have, especially dogs that were bred in places where there was agriculture, and I'll put up a map here, have higher copy numbers of the gene that regulates the amylase enzyme. Amylase breaks up starch, which is your long chains of carbohydrates that are found in bread and grains. So places where they were farming lots of bread and grains had a large number of these. Dogs tended to evolve larger numbers, and we're saying 10 copies. Other dogs usually have like 2 or 3 copies of this gene. So that means they're producing a lot more of this enzyme, basically. That means that dogs can actually eat a fair number of carbohydrates. You have to think about it. What were dogs eating before modern times? They were eating primarily table scraps, cooked table scraps from owners for probably the last 10,000 years or so. And if you think about it, this means that dogs aren't eating raw foods, they're eating cooked table scraps. Cats are a little bit different, of course. We think, maybe they're eating like mice, they're eating, birds, they're eating things in their environment. But again, humans are going to be feeding them little scraps of meat and scraps of fish, things that they would have cooked, and their cat's sitting at the base of the table meowing, wanting some of that. So at least for dogs and cats, there is definitely an argument to be made that their natural diet is actually human table scraps for the most part. Now, let's look at the health risks associated with a raw food BARF diet. BARF. So the first major one is that any home-cooked diet, any sort of diet that an owner makes, is potentially liable to actually cause nutritional deficiencies. The biggest one, of course, is that you overfeed or you underfeed the caloric intake. So if your macros are sort of inappropriate balanced, you overfeed your animal if they become overweight or obese. Especially a big problem nowadays because we live in a society, Joker meme, that has a surplus amount of calories available for everyone. And this can prone our animals to the metabolic disturbances of obesity and other sort of, diabetes, that kind of thing. In, of course, other societies before this one, and of course, and even in our own time, animals were much more likely to be emaciated. But there's also the micronutrients to be worried about. Now, I didn't really mention it before, but micronutrients are things like your minerals, your vitamins, these kind of things. We often forget about them, but they're really important, of course. Calcium-phosphorus ratio, especially in young animals, we think are puppies and lactating animals and pregnant animals, are really important. Raw food diets and any home-cooked diet are liable to have the incorrect amount of calcium to phosphorus ratio. And if that's wrong, you can actually get skeletal deformities, and animals can get things like rickets. When's the last time you heard about an animal getting rickets? I mean, it's not something that happens unless the owners are really kind of doing these kind of home-cooked diets and not feeding something, like a balanced veterinary diet. There's also the risk that these sort of diets, even if they're formulated, a lot of the time they're just formulated. They were never actually tested on any actual animals before being marketed. So this is why I like recommending foods that were actually done as a feeding trial, meaning that they fed them for, usually a short period of time, like usually a month or a few months is better than nothing. Because if it works on paper, it may not work in the real world. Case in point, one of the papers I found actually cited a study where they were feeding a raw food diet that was fish-based, and on paper it had the appropriate amount of taurine, to be precise. Taurine is an essential nutrient for cats, and if they don't have it, they get heart disease and die. Guess what happened to one of the cats in this study? It died because it had really bad heart disease from being fed a raw fish diet. That was supposedly had enough of the taurine, but didn't really, just kind of died. So definitely need to put that as a risk with these home-cooked sort of diets, or I guess they're not really cooking anything, It's just raw food. So the other thing that we need to keep in mind is that raw food is raw. It has foodborne pathogens on it. Things like E. coli, Salmonella, Campylobacter, Listeria. You've probably heard of these ones, the big outbreaks at the fast food, or the contaminated potluck picnic kind of thing. But you're intentionally feeding your animal something that could be contaminated. And this is a small number of potentially contaminated raw foods. There was an FDA study that they did actually the CDC, it was the FDA, yeah. I'll put the link in the description in case I'm wrong on either of those accounts. But they did a study where they checked the number of these foodborne pathogens and found that 10% of the samples were contaminated. That is a huge number. So you're potentially feeding your animals something that could make them violently ill, something that could make them vomit, diarrhea, not want to eat. That can make them really, really sick, even septic, and die. And it's not just the animals that are affected. Of course, if your dog dies, it's a tragedy. But if the people in your household gets hurt, that's a whole lot worse too. Animals that are fed foodborne pathogens will spread it to other members of your household. If you think about it, they'll spread it in their feces, and even a well-groomed, clean dog will sometimes have accidents in the house. Sometimes they'll have poop stuck to their fur. These kind of things, right? That exposes you and your family, even incidentally. There's also things like their saliva. Food goes in this hole, and saliva, drool, will get around their mouth. And if they're licking you, if they're grooming you, you are being exposed that way. And what about, what do cats do? What do dogs do? They lick their paws, like that. And if they do that, that means that if you touch them on their fur, you are exposing yourself to foodborne pathogens. So they are circulating it around your house as a biological hazard. And I do say hazard. There have been case reports of children dying because they get these foodborne pathogens because the animal was being fed something that was contaminated with salmonella or other things, E. coli. So there is always that risk. Now, say you beat the odds and, your animal doesn't get sick, your family doesn't get sick. Children immunocompromised and all of that. We of course want to keep those in mind. But, say you don't have any children, you're healthy adults, you've read the risks, you want to take it, you've heard good things about it. You're also contributing to antimicrobial resistance. Think about where your meat comes from. It comes from farms. It comes from places where there are lots of farm animals around. Your farm animal gets sick. What do? Well, they have a bacterial infection. They give them an antibiotic. The animal goes through a mandatory withholding period, which is a period of time where they should have cleared the antibiotic. And then once it does that, they slaughter the animal, basically. So at that stage, there is the risk that that animal's bacteria will still be on it, and having previously been exposed to that will have evolved resistance to it. And this is actually a fairly common problem. If you think about it, on the food chain, this bacteria could go from this animal that's been treated with antibiotics and then go to another one. And what's the best way to kill bacteria? It's cooking them. It's heating them up to a point where all the proteins denature and their membranes burst open and that sort of thing. So this is something where it's easily treatable and easily preventable by cooking your food or buying a cooked food. And at that stage, you kill off all of those bacteria and you don't have to worry about it. With a raw food diet, you don't get that benefit. You're getting all these antibiotic resistant bacteria. And you know what? They trade their genes like Pokemon cards. Even if you're buying your food from an organic source, there's a potential that they're swapping genes with someone who's, had this antimicrobial resistant gene evolve. That's how bacteria do. They have plasmid genes that they trade with each other horizontally. It's kind of weird. But it's all that aside, it's basically something that you need to be aware of as a risk. So, there's a nutritional risk, there's the risk of the food poisoning, and there's antimicrobial resistance. And, those ones can affect you, or can affect your children, or affect your pets. And if anyone gets one of those, it will reduce the effectiveness of antibiotics and potentially delay treatment and even lead to very serious infections and death. So, let's kind of review what we've talked about so far. These raw food diets they're kind of based on very spurious or absent science. They're based on false notions of what animals should be eating. They're very inappropriate in terms of nutrition and also higher risk in terms of the bacteria. Not to mention, there's of course things like parasites, that toxoplasmosis cats can get. You probably heard about the zombie one. I'll maybe make a video about that one in the future. But all that said, I really want to interrogate the notion of, natural is better. Obviously, that's a naturalistic fallacy, but I think it goes further than that. You're projecting your ideals of this mythological past, and that in the Paleolithic things were more healthy. Obviously, you can see my video of the bone upper castle dog as to why. That's a false notion. That's a myth. That in the past we were all healthy. This Rousseauian idea of the primordial whatever. I think this is a reactionary notion, right? Like this idea like, in the past they were healthier and that we should be going back to the past to, combat the degeneracy of modernity. This is fascist. Like, we shouldn't be basing our animals' lives and wagering our animals and our families' lives on this kind of reactionary nonsense, based on the science. Don't be a hero. Don't just listen to whatever you see on Twitter or on Google. You're better than that. Come on. So that's all I really wanted to say about raw food diets. I think that, most people have very noble ideas. They want to make sure their animals are healthy. They want to feed their animals things that won't hurt them. And, of course, a lot of people are skeptical about these food companies. They make money off of selling you, this is a billion-dollar industry, right? So, but there's also the risk that, if you go at your own and you listen to whatever you hear, you could be hurting your animals and hurting your family that way. And I think you need to be aware of that. And I think you also need to interrogate your own ideas of why you're doing this, right? What's your motivation for feeding a raw food diet? Is there something else going on? I've ranted long enough. I'm sure you probably have ideas about this. I'm sure you want to dispute at least part of this with me. So put it in the comments. Let me know. Suggest topics for future videos, and I'll see you next time. Cheers!